The moment his knees hit the floor that day, he had already sentenced himself. Prison didn't come as punishment. It came as relief. But even in his cell, they said he couldn't sleep. That he would whisper her name into the night. That he would beg the silence not to return. Not because he missed peace, but because peace no longer wanted him. And as for Amara, she vanished. No one saw her again. Not at shelters. Not on the news. Not in police records. Some claim she had been taken by child services and given a new identity. Others believed she had never existed in the way we understand existence. That she had appeared for a reason, and when that reason was fulfilled, she simply left. A ghost. A prophet. A curse. No one knew. And maybe they weren't supposed to. Because some truths don't belong in reports. They belong in memories. In the quiet knowing that the world isn't as silent as we pretend. Stories like Amara's don't ask to be solved. They ask to be heard. And people did listen. Something shifted in the city. People walked with a little more awareness. Looked others in the eyes a little longer. Thought twice before assuming a child was just a child. More missing person cases were reopened. More cold files found new eyes. Whispers of past sins became confessions. As if her presence had pulled back a curtain, one that couldn't be closed again. Not just in the courtroom. But in people's hearts. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Amara didn't come to ruin one man's life. She came to shake the dust off a world that had forgotten how to feel. How to listen. Because the truth isn't always loud. Sometimes, it walks barefoot through a courtroom. Sometimes, it hides in the eyes of a child. Sometimes, it doesn't shout at all. It waits for the right moment to be heard. And when that moment comes, nothing, not power, not pride, not fear, can stop it. So if you're still watching, and you're wondering what to make of the story, don't ask whether it was real. Ask whether you felt it. Because maybe that feeling, that quiet stirring in your chest, is the truth. Knocking. Waiting. Asking to be seen. And who knows? Maybe right now, somewhere out there. Someone like Amara is already listening. Already walking toward another secret that's been buried too long. And maybe, just maybe, that secret is yours. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and what the story made you feel. And if you believe in stories that speak louder than facts, stories that touch the heart, hit that subscribe button. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We listen to the ones no one else will. Until next time. Stay curious. Stay kind. And remember. Some voices never go silent. They're just waiting for someone to hear them. They weren't waiting for a ruling anymore. They were watching a man unravel. And in that unraveling, they saw something rare, the crumbling of a mask worn for decades. Because beneath every robe, every title, every proud proclamation of justice, there was still a man. And this man had built his life not on truth, but on the bones of one. Amara hadn't come for revenge. She had come for release. Not just for the woman whose name she carried in her heart, but for everyone watching. For everyone who had ever been told to stay quiet. For everyone who had ever screamed into silence and been met with indifference. This was their voice too. And now, the truth moved through the courtroom like a wave. Slow. Inevitable. Powerful. Washing away the lies, the smirks, the sharp words of defense. Even the gavel, once the final sound in every courtroom, seemed useless now. It couldn't drown her out. It couldn't silence what had already been heard. Judge Randall, once the most feared figure in the room, now looked like a man waiting to be sentenced, not by the law, but by his conscience. And it wasn't justice that broke him. It was truth. There's something different about the truth when it doesn't come from witnesses or evidence, but from within. When it speaks in a voice that you thought only you could hear. When it shows up in the eyes of a child you've never met and tells your story better than you ever could. No one knew how Amara did it. And maybe that was the point. Because what mattered wasn't how. It was why. The moment the truth came out, the room changed. Some looked horrified. Others shocked. A few, relieved. Because sometimes, even the worst stories give us something we need, a reminder that the past never stays buried. That secrets always have an expiration date. That justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes, it just needs someone brave enough to listen. And that girl, that fragile, barefoot girl, had become the vessel for everything buried, everything silenced, everything forgotten. Not with anger. Not with violence. With stillness. With words that shattered illusions. With a voice that refused to be ignored. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply stood, eyes full of something ancient. Something far too deep for her age. And when it was over, when the judge had collapsed under the weight of his own confession, she didn't gloat. She didn't even stay. She left. Quietly. Slowly. Like a shadow returning to the place it came from. She walked barefoot out of the courtroom and no one stopped her. Because some stories end not with punishment, but with release. She had done what she came to do. And now, peace, not just for Claire, but for everyone watching, had finally found its way in. The courtroom remained still long after the girl had gone. Not out of confusion. Not from shock. But from reverence, the kind reserved for moments when something sacred has happened. And this had been sacred in its own haunting way. The kind of moment people carry with them for the rest of their lives. The room had seen hundreds of cases, thousands of arguments, stacks of paper filled with accusations and defenses. But never before had truth arrived without evidence. Without documents. Without fingerprints or DNA. It had arrived barefoot, with a voice that cut through every layer of doubt like it was air. Amara's presence didn't just reveal what had been hidden, it exposed the very fragility of the justice system. How years of order and structure could crumble in a matter of moments when someone dared to speak what no one else could see. And yet, she hadn't exposed it to destroy it. She had exposed it to remind everyone of its purpose. Justice wasn't supposed to wear a robe or sit on a throne. It wasn't supposed to look down from a bench and decide who deserved to be heard. Justice, in its rawest form, was truth. And truth didn't care about titles, salaries, or status. It only cared about being seen. And now, it had been. The silence that lingered wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. As though the very walls of the courthouse were taking a deep breath. Soaking in what had happened. Etching it into their structure. Never to forget. The reporters who had once rushed to the front now stood frozen, their microphones held limply in their hands. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply stared at the space Amara had just vacated. Because how do you report a story like that? How do you write down the weight of something you felt more than you witnessed? The lawyers, usually so quick to argue, were now speechless. Their practiced words, their objections, their counters all felt too small, too rehearsed for what had unfolded. Even the bailiff, trained to enforce order, had stayed rooted to the floor. Order had already been restored, not by authority, but by truth. The young man in the back who had shouted her name, Claire, still stood trembling. Tears streaked down his face. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. And in that face was not just grief, but relief. Relief that the lies were finally over. Relief that his sister hadn't simply vanished. Relief that someone, anyone, had finally told her story. He didn't know who Amara was. He didn't know where she had come from. But in his eyes, she had become something more than a child. She was the voice his sister never had. The justice he had long given up on. The miracle he never thought would arrive. And now, she was gone. Just like she had come. No police escort. No cameras following her out. Just soft, soundless steps that disappeared into the world outside. Some said she had walked to the end of the street and vanished. Others swore they saw her pause at the courthouse doors, as if listening one last time, not with ears, but with something deeper. No one really knew. But everyone agreed on one thing. She left something behind. Not an object. Not a name. A presence. A story. A reminder that silence doesn't mean peace. And the ghosts we try to forget, they don't stop screaming just because we stop listening. They wait. And sometimes, they find someone willing to carry their voice. Someone small. Someone unexpected. Someone like Amara. In the weeks that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Not just across the city, but far beyond. News stations scrambled to understand what had happened. Psychologists debated the nature of her abilities. Skeptics tried to disprove it all. But none of that mattered. Because for those who were there, who felt the room shift, who saw a man fall not by force, but by the weight of his own soul, it didn't need explanation. It was real. As real as the bracelet found beneath the floorboards of Judge Randall's home. As real as the journal they uncovered hidden in his drawer, with entries filled with guilt and pleas for forgiveness written in the dead of night. As real as the skeletal remains near the riverbank, still wrapped in the same fabric described by a girl who had never been there. There were no coincidences. Only truth, finally uncovered. Randall was sentenced, not just by a jury, but by the eyes of a world that now knew who he really was. The once feared judge became a symbol. A reminder that no lie is buried too deep. That no crime is hidden forever. That sometimes, it takes a child, untouched by the corruption of adulthood, to speak what adults fear to hear. But this story wasn't just about him. It wasn't even just about Claire. It was about all of us. Because each person in that courtroom carried something home with them that day. A question. A whisper. A realization. What if the things we hide are never truly hidden? What if our secrets are not silent? What if someone, somewhere, is listening? Months passed. The courtroom returned to its usual rhythm, new cases, new faces, new judgments. The chairs were rearranged. The walls repainted. The gavel replaced. On the surface, everything moved forward. But underneath, nothing was the same. Because once a room has witnessed a truth so raw, so undeniable, it carries the echo of it forever. Those who had been present that day carried a weight in their hearts, a weight that didn't feel heavy, but holy. They had witnessed something that defied logic but settled deep in their bones. It made them more cautious. More curious. More quiet when people spoke, as if every word might be a clue to something deeper. Judge Randall's trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. The bracelet. The location. The journal. His own whispered confession. Some stories aren't whispered, they scream. This one began in the cold silence of a courtroom where laughter once lived. A silence that wasn't born from order, but from fear. Because truth has a voice louder than any gavel could silence, and sometimes, that voice comes from the smallest soul in the room. She was just a child. No more than 8. Thin arms, tired eyes, and a blue jacket that hung too loose on her like it had seen better days, like she had too. Her feet were bare, but her steps carried something heavier than footsteps ever could. No one noticed her at first. She didn't enter like someone who wanted attention. She entered like someone who had no choice. The kind of arrival that felt less like a presence, and more like a reckoning. That day, the courtroom had gathered for yet another ordinary hearing. People shifted in their seats. Whispers fluttered in the corners. Reporters fiddled with their pens. Lawyers checked their notes. And there, at the center of it all, sat Judge Randall. Stern. Cold. Respected. A man with years of law carved into the lines on his face. He had seen liars. He had punished criminals. He had heard sob stories and confessions and pleas for mercy. But he had never seen anything like her. Because what came next didn't feel like part of a legal proceeding. It felt like a haunting. 2 days before that moment, the city had whispered about a strange little girl roaming the streets. Alone. Silent. Speaking truths that rattled grown men to their core. She had no family. No home. Just a gift, or a curse, that let her see what others worked their whole lives to bury. The things she said weren't guesses. They were confessions pulled from places no one should have access to. Quiet sins, forgotten betrayals, secrets wrapped in lies. And she unraveled them without hesitation. One man fled after she muttered a few words about his past. Another collapsed onto the sidewalk, mumbling prayers, shaken by the weight of what she exposed. People didn't believe her, until they did. Until the color drained from their faces. Until the truth they'd hidden stared back at them through her wide, knowing eyes. They called the police. Not because she was dangerous, but because the truth was. When they asked her where she wanted to go, she said only one name. The name of a judge. The name of a man who, for decades, had delivered sentences with unwavering conviction. A man who believed he had buried his past so deep, it would never surface again. But the past doesn't die. It waits. So there she stood, small and unmoving. Every eye in the courtroom now drawn to her like gravity. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The tension already gripped every breath in the room. There was no anger in her. No drama. Just calm. Like someone who had already seen the ending, and was just waiting for the others to catch up. You see, when a secret festers long enough, it begins to rot. And this one had been rotting for years. This wasn't just about guilt. It was about silence. The kind of silence that destroys a person from within. That eats away at their sleep. That crawls into their dreams and whispers the name of the one they tried to forget. For Judge Randall, that silence was already breaking. Every crack in his composure. Every flicker of unease in his eyes. He could feel the walls closing in. The pressure mounting. And still, he held on to the belief that power could protect him. But power means nothing when the truth stands in front of you with bare feet and haunted eyes. She wasn't there to accuse. She was there to reveal. Her presence alone felt like a mirror no one wanted to look into. Not because it distorted the truth, but because it reflected it with brutal clarity. Somewhere, buried beneath titles and robes and years of courtroom decisions, was a memory Judge Randall had tried to erase. A memory that returned not with evidence, not with witnesses, but with a voice. A voice that didn't belong to the girl, but came through her. The courtroom's air grew thicker with every second. Reporters paused their scribbling. Lawyers leaned in. Even the bailiff looked unsure. Something was happening, and it wasn't just strange. It was terrifying. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about revelation. What do you do when the past walks back into your life, not with rage, but with stillness? What do you say when the very thing you buried stares at you through innocent eyes? You say nothing. Because there are no words that can undo a truth long ignored. The girl, Amara, her name, wasn't there to speak for herself. She was there to speak for someone else. Someone who no longer had a voice, but had never stopped screaming. And the scream. It had found a way through. Years ago, something happened near a riverbank. Something quiet. Something unreported. Something that lived in the shadows. A life ended. A secret kept. And a promise made, never speak of this again. But secrets don't listen to promises. And in that courtroom, they screamed louder than any defense ever could. Judge Randall's breath quickened. His skin turned pale. He gripped the bench like it could anchor him to the present, but the past was already flooding in. The bracelet. The rocks. The river. Details no one should have known. Words no child should speak. Emotions too real to be fabricated. And when the girl began naming what he had long buried, not even the law could protect him anymore. Not from her. Not from the truth. Not from the voice of the woman who had died long ago, and had finally found someone willing to listen. Because Amara didn't just uncover lies. She unchained ghosts. She was never lost. She was sent. And her mission wasn't to ruin lives, it was to free them from the weight of deception. To give a voice back to those who had been silenced. That day, the courtroom didn't just witness a confession. It witnessed a collapse. Not just of a man. But of a lie. And in its place, rose a truth that would echo long after the gavel fell. There are moments in life when time doesn't move forward, it folds in on itself. And for Judge Randall, that courtroom was no longer a place of power. It had become a tunnel leading straight into the heart of everything he feared, everything he had hidden. The walls of justice had always protected him. Thick robes, wooden benches, gavels, they were symbols of his authority. But authority means nothing when faced with the memory of a trembling hand, a fading breath, a body slipping into stillness beneath the weight of river stones. He hadn't thought of her in years. At least, not during the day. But the nights. They had always belonged to her. In his dreams, she never screamed. She whispered. She whispered with eyes wide open, skin cold and wet, reaching out from beneath the earth like the truth he never wanted to face. And now, she wasn't whispering anymore. She was screaming, through a child's voice. Through a girl who had never met her. threw words that burned like fire but landed like ice in his chest. The crowd around him blurred. Faces dissolved into noise. All he could feel was the weight in his lungs, that crushing, silent pressure of guilt resurfacing after years of pretending it had drowned. The girl had said her name. A name he thought time had erased. But names don't vanish. Not when they've been carved into a soul. Claire. He had told everyone she left. He had lied to her family. To the police. To himself. It was easier than admitting the truth that he was the reason her story had ended. That his hands, the same hands that now signed verdicts and ruled over fates, had once trembled with panic as he pushed rocks over her still body, praying the river would carry away both the evidence and the memory. But rivers have a way of preserving what matters. And memories never truly wash away. Now, the courtroom was no longer a place of law. It had become a confessional. Not because anyone asked him to speak, but because the silence had grown too loud to bear. And still, he clung to denial. Even as the words piled up like evidence. Even as the girl's soft voice painted the truth with chilling precision. The bracelet. The scratch. The floorboards. He told himself it couldn't be real. That this was manipulation. That it was slander. That somehow, this little girl was playing some cruel game. But games don't make your hands shake. And children don't carry the voices of the dead unless those voices refuse to rest. The reporter stopped writing. The lawyers fell silent. The crowd held their breath.